So, what would it be like to become the world's best sommelier, to be named the world's best sommelier in competition with 60 other top notch sommeliers from around the world in front of a live audience and very stern faced judges watching you taste wine, describe it, all blind, meaning you don't see the labels, but you have to tell everything about the wine. You also have to serve them perfectly, as you would in a restaurant, and write a very detailed technical exam. Well, our next guest is going to tell us exactly what that feels like. Plus, he's going to share his tips for choosing wines from a restaurant list, as well as which questions should you ask the sommelier. So, some very practical advice, too. I'm Natalie McLean, editor of Canada's most popular online wine classes at nataliemclean.com/pro. And you've joined us here on the Sunday Sipper Club, where we go live every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern, Toronto, New York time, to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, before I get started, please post in the comments, where are you logging in from, what's in your glass, and what's the weather like? As you know, I am obsessed by the weather. It's a wine thing. I'm going to refresh and see if I can see you folks on Facebook, because I think this is working now. Yes, there we are. We're live. Yay. um, and well, now here we go. Very interesting. Okay, so guys, tell me what's in your glass, where you're logging in from. I see James Norton is here and Rochelle is here. I would love to know. Ah, Lori Sweet. Yay. Yeah, that's my feeling exactly, Lori. Yay. We finally got it. Okay, so guys, I'm going to tell you a bit about our guest tonight. Very interesting. Just before I do that, you know you're going to enjoy this conversation, so take a moment right now and share this video, even if you're watching the video replay. Even better, comment, tell your friends and followers why you'd like them to join the conversation or watch the video, and why it'd be worth their while. Hello, James Norton from St. Augustine, Florida. It's cooler, 85 degrees today. And Michelle Gouvernement is, she apologizes for her Irish whiskey coffee today in Alberta. That's okay, Michelle. Okay, guys. So let me tell you about our guest, I should say. Okay, so back to here. Now, our guest was born and raised in Sweden and initially studied nanotechnology engineering, if you can imagine, but decided to change his career path to food and wine. He has worked at several of the world's best restaurants in Stockholm, Copenhagen, Britain, and New York City. And in 2016, he won the world's best sommelier competition, competing with 60 other sommeliers, as I mentioned, the best from around the world. And this grueling competition is only held every 3 years. And he joins me live now from his restaurant in Manhattan, Legacy Records. Welcome to the Sunday Sipper Club, Arvid Rosengren.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Ah,
Happy,
cheers.
happy
Yes,
to be here.
cheers.
Oh,
Happy to be live with you. Ah, technology. Anyway, you're cool as a cucumber as usual, Arvid. I know you've been under pressure a lot of times in your life, but let's start with kind of what was the first wine that really made you take notice of wine?
I mean, I guess there's been many of those situations, but, and I was already in wine before I had that moment, but not necessarily as seriously as I am today. But I was working in a wine shop, and not a fancy, well stocked. It was kind of a run of the mill monopoly, as they are in Sweden, liquor and wine stores. And I was trying to learn, because inevitably you get a bunch of questions. So I was bringing home wine and tasting them. And the first wine that really, I think, I don't know, triggered something in my brain was a pretty basic, I don't even remember the producer, but it was a pretty basic co-op Nebbiolo, from Piedmont, a Langhe Nebbiolo or some such. And at the time, I just couldn't understand how all of these different things could be in the glass at the same time. It
So
was
when
just
you
such
say
a
all these different things, do you mean aromas or
aroma,
flavors?
different aromas and different perceptions and tannin and acidity. It's just like such a, but mostly just like I just remember loving how that smelled. It was such
Okay.
a great sense. It's so like multifaceted.
Okay,
And I
awesome.
went down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out why that was.
Yeah,
Here
awesome.
we are.
Do you want to bring your mic around closer,
Yeah,
maybe a little bit, just in case, because I don't know where your volume is feeding in from, but just well, I can
sure.
hear you. Oh, that's better.
Great.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so that's your first memorable wine. Now, take us to the moment where you thought, "Oh, I want to become a sommelier." You took it up a notch. You actually want to work as a sommelier.
Hmm.
What was that moment? Where were you? What triggered that
Right.
thought?
So as you were saying before, I was kind of deep into engineering studies. I was studying nanotech or nanoscience engineering in Sweden, and as much as I loved sort of reading about the newest discoveries on the sort of science front, I somehow sort of halfway through that journey realized I would spend the rest of my life in a lab coat, and as great as that is, it wasn't for me. And I had worked in restaurants previously, not very serious restaurants, but I really loved hospitality. And I really, in a way, when I was a kid, I dreamt about being a chef. So, like I said, I somehow found my way into working in a wine store. A friend got me a job at a summer gig, and that I went on a hiatus and met a bunch of interesting people. And a guy who I worked with at the time who had a much deeper and better sort of restaurant experience at the time we were working together. He told me like, hey, if you want to really get serious about this thing, and it seems like you're now like you've been away from your studies for 2 years or close to at least. He said you have to get into to restaurants. You have to become. That's the only way. Becoming a sommelier is the only way you're going to taste as much wine as you need to really be good at
Interesting.
this.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious why you pursued sommelier versus chef because you cooked for your young
Hmm.
family. I think you said your
Yeah.
mother was a emergency night nurse in rehab, and so you were
Yeah,
cooking.
not emergency, but she worked night
Okay,
shifts, so,
okay,
and on a rotation. So at some points, yeah, I cooked for my younger siblings. I really enjoyed that. It's one of those things where, especially in Europe, it's very traditional that if you take that step towards being in a sort of culinary school, you do it at a very early age. And I'm not saying it's a dead end, but it's very hard to get back to any sort of the generalist studies if you go down that path. And you do that at age 15, 16, right? So I decided I was doing pretty well in school and decided to go down a different path.
so
Uh,
you continued
yeah,
with your studies, yeah,
right,
because
right. And
nanotech
wine?
engineering isn't exactly basket weaving, so you
No,
you had
no.
choices.
I had choices, and
Yeah,
and wine kind of satisfied two aspects. It satisfied my sort of nerdy side of like figuring out why things are the way they are, that kind of, you know, academic side of things, and that hospitality to take care of people
yeah.
side. So it was a good, compromise isn't a fair word, but it was a good sort of mix of the two things that I really enjoy doing.
I can see how that
Yeah,
comes together.
yeah.
And I'm just sorry to, where is your microphone? I just want to make sure. Is it on your there? Is that
Right
where it
here.
is?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because I'm getting a little fuzzy. I don't know if you can pull it
All
in
right,
front of your collar a
we
little
can do
bit.
that. Let's rearrange.
Okay. Yeah. Take a moment. It's
Let's
okay.
do that.
We're all very understanding. And I'm going to just, while you're
I
rearranging
hold
there.
it.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Let me see. Where is the mic?
Right here in my hand.
Okay, that I think that
Yeah.
will be better. And I'm just going to check in with comments here because they've been coming in like crazy. So Beverly Asselson is here from SoCal, Southern California. Hello.
Uh-huh.
Rochelle says she's really looking forward to this chat, still drinking her Blanc de Blanc. Patty and Paul Hollander are here from Virginia. And Stephen Andrews says hello from Waterloo. Arvid must be great at
Hello.
food and wine matching. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get into that, Stephen.
Sure.
Um, so let's take a moment and sort of maybe frame this a little bit. Do you have like what I call a favorite failure, like a low point in your career or a moment or an anecdote where it was, I don't know, you learned something, you became better because of it? Maybe you could describe what that moment
Hmm.
might have been. Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of those, but one that stands out. It was definitely not a failure because in hindsight, I think I did really well, but it felt like such a failure at the time. And this was when I was competing for my first time in in the competition of the world's best sommelier, which is like you said earlier, it's every 3 years. And to get to that point, you already have to be the best in your respective nation. So every country sort of sends a representative. And I was in Tokyo and competing, and I really wanted to do well. I really wanted to win, to be frank, and I really was really pushing myself. I was studying so hard and tasting so much, and I kind of wanted to. I was at the time, it was like I said, it was my first competition, and no one's ever sort of won on their first. So, but I kind of wanted to enjoy that sort of underdog status and sort of slide through and do well. And I think I really did well, and I ended up not getting to the finals. So the competition is over 3 days.
Okay.
And there's a quarterfinal. So you start with all 60, then on day 2 you're 15, and then on day 3 it gets down to 3. So I was part of the 15, which was a massive success in itself. But I didn't appreciate it at the time. So when I was not part of the final 3, I was really upset and really angry, and I really thought I'd done pretty well. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned from that was that you have to be there and sort of enjoy the moment, which I did much better at in 2016 when I ended up
Obviously,
winning.
yes. Why do you think you didn't place even in the top, I don't know, 3 or even in the top 15?
It's hard to say. I mean, I was in the top 15. I think it was
Okay.
top 12 or 15. I don't remember what the number was at the time, but I it's hard to say. There's no like official scores at that point.
Okay.
You don't get much feedback after you're done, but there's experience involved, and you kind of have to learn the way that things work too.
Sure.
So I don't think it was meant for me at the time. I was probably a little bit too eager in that sense, that I probably wasn't putting a smiley face and sort of the hospitality nature on. I was just like in it to win, and that's not the right way to go about it. I think at
Okay.
least when I did win, I was in a much calmer state of mind.
Calmer. Yeah,
Whole
which
thing.
is interesting because I know the preparation that you did, or I've read about it. So in Japan, maybe perhaps this eagerness, but also nerves played a role. But you got a grasp on that. You hired an acting coach, didn't you, for
Yeah,
the 2016 competition? Tell me about her. What kind of exercises did she get you doing to calm you down?
yeah. So I mean, I met with an acting coach a few times, and she gave me some really good tools. Her background was in stage acting, and sort of what I was looking for was an improv acting coach, and she gave me some great tips on how to stand and how to breathe and
Oh, give
posture
us
and those kind
examples.
of
What
things.
was she telling you to do?
I
How
mean,
should you stand?
in a way, it's really simple, but
Okay.
if you're in that situation, stand sort of broader legged than you think is appropriate. It was her way of putting it. Like, if you think you're getting too spread, it's probably good. It gives you a sort of broader base and a better way to sort of to breathe into your stomach and to calm your nerves, and you really get a grounded base.
Okay,
And
so
she
your
also put
wide leg stance.
yeah.
Okay. And so
and
what
she
else?
and she put me through a whole series of I can't remember specifically, but it was for me sort of embarrassing exercises at the time. I'm sure anyone who's done theater is well sort of accustomed to these kinds of things, but it's just like being slightly more comfortable and being nervous and being uncomfortable, I guess, on stage. Being able to laugh at yourself a little bit too, I think, is
Yeah.
really
Well, I've
important.
heard about improv being used as sort of for corporations to bond teams and so
Yeah.
on, because you really have to act in the moment. It's very emotional. So I can
Hmm.
imagine this was really great training for being on
Right.
stage. Like, was she getting you to do, envisioning yourself calm, or like was there some sort of mental exercises as well?
Yeah, I did a lot of. I don't think it came from her necessarily, but I did a
Okay.
lot of those like vision, um, with sort of trying to put yourself in that moment and seeing yourself calm and flowing and all that. So I did the
Yeah.
whole thing. I meditated every day for
Ah.
for years and that whole thing. So
What kind of meditation do you do?
regular sitting down and breathing. I have to
Okay.
say, after my daughter was born and my mornings became different, I haven't, for about a year, I've slacked off that. But
Slacked off because you're a
yeah,
new parent. I think you
yeah,
can be excused, yes.
I'll,
But
I'm trying to get back to it.
yeah, absolutely. And
It's a
you
good habit.
also, I don't know if you still do this, but Brazilian jiu-jitsu at lunch,
Yeah,
something like that?
still do.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay, so
still
that's
do. Not as much.
calming.
Again, not as much as I can. But it's a kind of an active. It's a weird thing because it's a very aggressive sport. It's a real sort of martial art. You're wrestling and trying to submit people and trying not to get your arms broken or getting your neck choked. But it's a very active form of meditation, especially
Okay.
when you have a busy. Most days I tend to work 6 or 7 days a week for anywhere between 10 to 16 hours.
Wow.
It's a lot, especially with being a new parent. That if I can
Yeah.
get that hour of very focused on something so sort of primal as sort of a life and death battle, it's helpful.
That's
Uh,
great. And so describe kind of when you did win, like what was the process? So you say they narrow it down to three people. Do they
hmm
bring all three of you on stage? Like
hmm
describe what it feels like, what the setting is, what the audience is. Like give us a sense of where you were and what was happening.
Yeah. So I mean, the competition is over 5 days, three
Okay.
of which are sort of active competition, and you're tested on your sort of theoretical knowledge, which is definitely the bulk of what the time studying goes into. Like I said, I spent years preparing for this. So theoretical study is a lot of that. Um, and it plays a massive role in getting far in the competition. But the further you get, the more sort of blind tasting and especially sort of practical tests take over. So the final stage of it, they call the 15 semifinalists on stage and essentially tell 12 of them to leave, and you sort of start right there in front of an audience, performing sort of a mock restaurant setting. They'll you know you'll go on one at a time, and they'll tell you sort of you'll have whatever 5 tables. They'll tell you this table over here has ordered a magnum of red wine that they want decanted and served. And these people over here want the food and wine matching for this menu, and over here you're going to do a little blind tasting and sort of various scenarios. And then they'll tell you have 17 minutes to do this. So you have to sort of allocate your time, and then they'll try to trip you up as you go along. So sort of midway through decanting, they'll tell you that one person actually wants a dry martini cocktail or whatever. It's sort of a trap setting. None of it's really any harder than what you encounter in a restaurant, because that's
Okay.
what it's all about, being flexible and seeing to people's needs. But it's a very different thing when the spotlight's on and you're sweating and
Abs-
and your nerves are telling you to run off stage and go hide. That's a very different thing.
Wow. And
Yeah.
it just, you must have this inner core of calm. Like, and I've read other people who have observed you in restaurant settings, just like it can be a busy, busy night and you're just centered. Do you think that whole training for this competition helped you with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's not. I don't know. I think a lot of people right now, if they're watching, are are laughing because I'm a pretty stressed person
Really? You don't
for the
seem
most
it.
part. But I think it's one of those things you have to and you can. I think I can turn it on and off in that setting too, though. When
Okay.
you can be as stressed as you need to be off stage, and once you're in front of people, you have to be able to switch it off.
Wow.
I mean, it's the same thing if you're working in a restaurant. You know that there are 6 or 7 tables that want to talk to you right now, but you have to sort of prioritize and get out there and smile and pretend like they're the only ones that have your full attention, right?
Oh, that's
So
wow.
yeah,
That's grace under pressure, I must say.
yeah,
Well, folks, if you're enjoying this conversation, take a moment right now to share this video with your friends and family, followers, and even better, tell them why you think they should join us, whether it's right now live or in the replay. And as you know, at the end of every conversation, for those who do share and comment, I draw for a prize. So tonight we will be drawing for a prize from last week's guest, Jamie Evans, and I will let you know more about that at the end of this video. But please take a moment to share. And I'm going to just dive into the comments here because I've been wrapped up in this conversation, which is so great. And Sharian Sonkar. Hello, this is Sharian from Dubai, and she is a sommelier. I just love how these Facebook Lives connect all of us. Hello, Sharian. Let me know if I'm mispronouncing your name, Sharian. I've got Line Wang and Kerso listening from New York City. Maybe you know her,
I
Arvid.
do. I do know
Okay.
her.
Okay. Well, she's here.
Great.
Ellen McDonald has joined us from Nova Scotia. Hello, Ellen. Linda White Alexander has joined us. Raylene McLean is here. Linda Doyle from Inverness. We've got a whole East Coast contingent. Beverly Asleson is saying, I can understand the stress you might have felt. So let me go back up to Sharian Sankar from Dubai, the sommelier. I just want to ask, what's your best pairing? Sharian, you beat me to the punch. I wanted to ask Arvid about his favorite food and wine pairing or most difficult one. The one you want to talk about, Arvid. What
All
pairing
right.
was that?
I mean, I could talk about any number of pairings. I think when it comes to food and wine pairing, it's one of those things that always comes up. And I think as important as food and wine pairing is, I think the most important things that you eat, things that you enjoy, and drink things that you enjoy. I think the sort of having worked with food and wine pairing menus in restaurants where we tested 100 wines to find the right 6 or 7 to serve with our food menus, and still got very varied feedback from our guests. I've come to realize that food and wine pairing is so subjective. Outside of those like super classic pairings,
Give us an example or two of the super classic pairings, just for
super
those who are
classic
listening.
pairings are things like Sancerre and sort of Saint Maud goat cheese or that kind of thing, right? Where it's just like it works. But once we get into like finer subtleties, it's really tough. And I think for the most part, the most important thing is to drink something you really enjoy. One thing that we do here that is a perfect pairing that has become a really classic at a restaurant here is we do a honey lacquered duck. So it's duck that's been sort of dry aged like beef, and then it's poached in honey and roasted. So it's like blackened skin. Duck to me tends to be sort of a lighter wine. Like you usually drink like a Burgundy or that kind of thing with duck.
Okay.
But this comes out so like spicy and roasted and sort of full of flavor that it's a really perfect pairing with Northern Rhone Syrah. And I tend to prefer those wines with a little bit of age, but with this kind of preparation.
Oh, I think you're frozen
from a lighter
Oh,
vintage.
Okay, great. Sorry, you're frozen for a moment, but you're back. Good.
Good.
So, what if people want Sauterne, a traditional Bordeaux dessert wine, with say ice cream? What do you do?
I think that's one of my. I think Sauterne for the most part is not a dessert wine.
Okay, explain why.
It's so, especially when it comes to things like ice cream.
Yeah.
And this is like I don't want to rack down on people who spend a lot of time on food and wine pairing, but that's not to say that after a while it becomes intuitive. But here's the thing with sweet wine of the Sauterne kind. They're usually pretty high in alcohol too. So Sauterne usually kind of clocks in at sort of 11, 12, 13% alcohol, right? Probably 13% plus. It has to be, right? When you eat something cold with that, temperature lowers the perception of flavor, of aroma, but it doesn't lower the perception of alcohol. So what happens if you eat a scoop of ice cream and drink a glass of Sauterne is that Sauterne will taste less than it should and will feel more alcoholic than it should. I think Sauterne, if it's from like a great, really sort of sweet vintage, a really ripe vintage, can go well with things like classic sort of caramelly tarts or almond cakes or tarte tatin or that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I don't necessarily think it's a dessert wine. I prefer my Sauterne and that kind of wine with cigars or with cheese or with foie gras or that sort of thing. for dessert wines, I lean more towards lower alcohol things, like usually like Riesling, of whether it's ice wine or Baroness Leche, that kind of thing. I think it's more of a I think it's more of a versatile wine.
Okay. Okay, so tell us, like, I'm jumping all around here, but tell us how you prepared and studied for the exam. I mean, you just must have been tasting constantly. What did you do? Like, I'm imagining Rocky, the old movie, and he's drinking raw eggs and climbing the steps or whatever. But
No,
what
it's
were you
not.
doing?
It's definitely it was like that for the last, especially for the last. I mean, like I said, I spent 7 years on the sort of competition circuit, for lack of a better word, from becoming best sommelier in Sweden to winning the world's best title. And that's it. I should say that's a short time.
Okay.
My two predecessors, who won the title before me, each spent over 2 decades before getting there. So I did it in a very intense manner, and I decided on that early, that I would go hard, but try to get out quick. So part of that routine was that, for the last, like, I think it was 6 or maybe 9 months, I wasn't allowed to look in our refrigerator. I had one shelf in the refrigerator that was like food, and the rest was wine. So I had asked a bunch of friends and wine stores, etc., just like give them my credit card and send me 12 bottles of wine. And my wife would every morning, so she worked normal hours and I worked restaurant hours, so she was usually up earlier than me, and she'd pour a slide of wines to taste blind in the morning.
Oh, how
So
early? What time?
this is probably at 8 in the morning. So
Ooh.
not, but that's early for me. So I wake up before I eat any breakfast or do anything else. I taste, I blind taste these wines. I do it like we're doing now. I would connect, either just film myself, or I would connect with my sort of coach back home in Sweden, who'd then give feedback on how I was doing. I used to camera a lot to figure out, like, if you have verbal tics, if you keep saying or
Wow.
you're doing that kind of thing to it. So
So you
um,
were videoing yourself and then doing a replay like they do with
yeah,
football, like watching every
yeah.
play and
I might,
every wrist
yeah, at some
turn.
point I might release some of those embarrassing videos. Um, so no, so I did that every morning and every night. When I got home from work, there was another flight waiting for me, and of course during the day I was spending hours studying, and also going to other colleagues around town, asking them to prepare blind tastings and spirit flights and practical tests for me, that kind of
Wow.
thing.
But
So
you were working in a restaurant like
yeah,
whatever, 60, 80 hours a week already. How did you squeeze all this in?
well, it didn't do much else.
Wow.
That was it for, it was a hectic time.
Yeah, I'll bet.
I didn't have any kids at that time, so right now
Oh,
I probably wouldn't be able to do it. So
sure. Sure, sure, sure. And what about preparing for the spirits part of the competition? Because it's not just about wine, it's about all beverages.
mhm.
How do you taste all these spirits without, I don't know, destroying your palate?
Yeah, I mean it's real. Palate fatigue, especially when tasting booze, is real. So the key, if you want to become a good blind taster for spirits, is to learn. It's exposure. I think you gotta smell a lot. And if you have, usually the blind tasting of spirits are sort of, let's say they put down 8 glasses. My goal is to be able to nail 5 or 6 on smell alone, so that I don't have to start tasting until the very end. Um, because once you start tasting, you you start messing with your palate, and everything becomes difficult. So yeah, you have to nail more than half of it on the nose alone, and then move to the taste. But
Wow.
spirits are easier. Spirits are so sort of defined by their category, in the sense that it's pretty easy once you learn the sort of archetypes to start getting there.
And
Yeah.
do you mean that spirits are so, I don't know, like a tequila is always easily identifiable
Yeah.
versus a
Even if they're
Cabernet?
exactly. Even if
Yeah.
they're different, they're not as different, and the differences are so marked. Whereas the difference in wine can be very subtle. Sometimes you get Shiraz that tastes like Malbec and that kind of thing. You don't get that with spirits. If it's a
Right.
Scotch, it's very different from a bourbon, and it's
Right.
always going to be very different from a bourbon.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Excellent. Wow. Okay, so Linda Doyle is here from Inverness. Beverly, okay. Adam Bauer is here. He's a sommelier and owner of a restaurant. Welcome, Adam. Sharian Sonkar says, Saw movie is completely changed my life. I think you're talking about the sommelier, SOMM, Saw movie. Changed my life, and following Arvid since he became the best sommelier, I really learned a lot. And what else do you want us to know? Okay, so she's following you. You were in the Somm documentary, right, Arvid?
I have a minor. I'm in one scene in the new one coming out in a few weeks. The
Okay.
third
Oh,
one coming
there's a
out
new
soon.
one coming out. Oh, I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
wait. Oh,
I don't
and
know what my role is yet, but we'll we'll see.
I would hope
We'll see.
winner.
No, there's a blind tasting sort of scene in that movie where I'm in.
Oh, so
So that's
cool.
it.
So many
Yeah,
people love that inside the
yeah.
industry. It's a documentary,
Hmm.
folks, for those who haven't heard about this, called Somm. And I guess, yeah, this would be the third one. Sharon Smith says, more please. She's loving your advice. And Charlotte Cadieux is here. Hello, Charlotte. So you guys are just all piling into our virtual
Yeah.
wine bar here. Okay,
Cheers.
great. Let's oh, there's so many questions I want to ask you. So let's go to some practical advice for some of our viewers here tonight, Arvid. What are your best tips or strategies when you're presented with a wine list, especially a good one that's kind of
Hmm.
long? How do you approach it? What do you advise diners? Like, where do you start in
Yeah.
choosing a wine from a restaurant list? Because often the wines are not wines we're familiar with in the liquor store by design, because you want to offer new taste experiences. So how do you attack that restaurant list?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I could say, but I think the most important thing is to be honest and to be clear in your desires. Because I mean, if we're going to be real here, I think very often it comes down to money as well, which is fair. I mean, wine can cost. I have on my wine list here at Legacy Records, I have wine from $45 on the wine list for a bottle up to, 4,500,
Hmm.
and it's not easy to gauge who's looking for what. Um, so I think it's really really important for people to sort of skip the facade, because I see this a lot from all kinds of different people, where they're like, oh, and we're looking for a medium bodied red. What should we drink? Or like you pick. I like when people come in and say, hey, we like this, whether we know what that is or not. We tend to like white Burgundy, or if it's very unspecific, hey, we tend to like spicy red wine, and we have this much money to spend. I'm probably gonna overperform on if someone comes in and says, hey, we have $50 to spend on it. We want to drink a great bottle of wine. I'm going to do my best to find the greatest possible experience for them. But it becomes very hard when there's like an opaqueness about what the expectations are. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, it does. How do you
Yeah.
get around the money issue though? It's so sensitive,
It's
and
yeah,
like
but I don't
especially
understand why it has to be that way.
okay.
It's yeah. I mean it if you're going out with someone, it might be
Yeah,
a
a
business
date.
thing, it might be a date, it might be a romantic, whatever. I think the greatest thing you can say is like, hey, I like Pinot Noir. I don't have to drink a Pinot Noir, but I do like a softer red. I want to spend $100 on a bottle of wine. All right.
Yeah.
Then we can like start looking at alternatives. I mean, part of the skill of the sommelier is trying to gauge that. You have 20 seconds to figure out what people want, right? That's usually like how long an interaction is.
Well, what are you looking
Before,
for? How
yeah,
expensive their clothing is, or what are you doing if they
no,
don't
not at
say
all.
anything?
Yeah, I mean, what I do is I always try to throw out a few different alternatives,
Okay.
and sort of gauge and yeah, I should say I don't necessarily think a long wine list is always a great wine list. I tend to think that we're moving in the direction of where smaller, more curated wine lists are better. That's what I like to work with too. It's harder to make a great small wine list than it is to make a long wine list.
You know, I have to say you're right on because Mark
Yeah,
Twain, and I've said this before, said, I would have written you a short note, but I didn't have time.
yeah,
Right? Like
exactly.
it
I mean, it's
takes
the same
time to
thing.
curate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But what if you
Um,
don't want to declare out loud how much you're willing to pay for love or a first date? Like they're
Yeah,
trying
well,
to be subtle.
that's where I will give a high, sorry, a low, medium, and a sort of I'll always start on the not on the lowest end probably because I don't want to that would offend someone too. But if you narrowed it down to someone wants to drink a Pinot, then we'll look at Burgundy, and I'll point out three different things that I think are really great wines, and then usually we might not end up with one of those three, but it's a starting point. Someone then asks
Right.
us, "Oh, what's this like?" And we can start talking about how that's different from the next wine, and we might not be where they started, but you kind of have to prod the discussion along.
What do you
But
think
there are,
of this thing? Like, if you're the one with the restaurant list, you tip it up towards yourself, and
Mhm.
you're pointing, and only you and the som can see, and you point to, I'd like something in this range, and you're pointing
yeah,
to the price, but no one else can see that you're pointing to the
yeah,
price. Is
that's
that a
fine.
sneaky
That's a
tip?
great thing. Yeah, that's a
Okay,
great way of doing it. And I
okay,
mean, I don't think it's not necessarily always about the money. It shouldn't be,
true.
but especially when it comes to a restaurant you're unfamiliar with or you've never been there before. If they're offering things that are go range from 2 to 4 or 5 figures, then at some point you're going to have to get to that point of the discussion, right?
Yeah.
But I usually also get a sense from how well versed are people in the conversation of wine. What happens a lot, and this is something that we can get to as well, is I think one thing that is really important if you're into wine is to sort of challenge your sort of preconceived notions about what you like and don't like. What I get a lot is I'll tell you one thing that I hear from guests that don't make sense. This sentence does not make sense. You'll understand why. When people come into the restaurant and they ask for help from a sommelier or they're looking to choose a bottle of wine, I go over to them. I ask, "What do you like to drink?" And they say, "Well, we like things like Napa Valley Cabernet or Pinot Noir." And at that point, those two wines are very, very different, right? They kind of encompass between them all kinds of red wine. So I don't have a lot to work with. They like wine. I figured that out. That's kind of the extent of the discussion, right? So, or the inverse, when people come in and they say, "I don't like Sauvignon Blanc" or "I don't like Chardonnay." I think, especially for people who are getting into wine, the first step is to figure out what you don't like.
Hmm.
But I think the next thing, a few years later, is usually an epiphany where you have to challenge that.
Okay.
So people who may not like Chardonnay may like Chablis a lot, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's usually not what they think of when they say Chardonnay. They think about some oaky,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
know,
Whereas Chablis, Northern
California.
Burgundy,
Yeah.
unoaked.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing. But if you're in a setting where you feel, if you're in a restaurant, you're in a new restaurant, you feel like, oh, I'm getting the sense that these guys are serious about wine. The glassware is good, the wine list is fun. Like I see a lot of things I like here. I think the best tip to get something out of that is to talk to someone, get
Yep.
sommelier over, say, hey, I see that you have this that I like a lot. What else should I be drinking? Or hey, I had this wine. And today in this world, everyone has a smartphone. It's so easy to show a picture like, hey, I had this at another restaurant. Do you have anything in that similar to that? Or if I like that, do you have anything I would like?
Yeah.
Or one tip that I usually give is to look at the weirder sections of the wine list. What that means to you might be different, but
Okay.
if someone bothered to list a bunch of Hungarian wines on their wine list, there's probably a reason for that. And those wines are probably both great value and they're probably pretty delicious and interesting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
those wines are not flying off the shelves by themselves.
No.
They're there because someone cared to put them there. And I think that should count for more than it does in the mind of sort of consumers and
I love those tips. Look for
Yeah,
the
yeah,
weird sections and then talk to your
yeah,
sommelier, but also if this, then that. So, like the Amazon
yeah,
algorithm. If you bought this book, you'll like this book.
yeah, yeah.
So, kind of similar to that. Wow, we've got so many comments coming in too. Sorry, guys, I'm not trying to ignore you here, but Paul and Patty says they watched Psalm 2, a great watch. Linda says he's charming and refreshing. Elaine Bruce says, I'm going to a restaurant where I can order a flight. Psalm's Choice, hi from Calgary. I like variety. Heine Peterson is here with a thumbs up.
Ah, I know him.
Do you know him? Yeah.
he's he's
Okay.
he's a good wine drinker. I'll say that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
yeah.
Heine? How do you
Hi,
pronounce?
but it's late where he is. It's go
Okay,
away, I
yeah. Well,
think.
we get people logging in from
Yeah,
like Hong Kong, and like I don't know why they're up at
yeah.
3 in the morning, 8 in the morning watching this, but
Right.
anyway, hardcore,
Yeah,
really good. Linda says, loving what he's saying. Go off the beaten path. Patty says,
yeah.
I love the education you can gain from a sommelier. And Lori Sweet says, what is the name of his restaurant? I'm in NYC often. Promotional opportunity, Arvid.
Promotional
Go,
reps-
go ahead.
restaurants called Legacy Records.
Why'd you call it Legacy Records?
It is. So I mean, you can go into a lot of sort of philosophy behind it. Me and my partners in this restaurant, we don't. We like people to come to our restaurant because they want to come to our restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
If we would have named this restaurant Chez Arvid or Amphora, people would have expectations about what type of cuisine. Is it French? Is it Italian? Is it this? Is it that? And you'll only enter into their mind when they're on a Tuesday night thinking, hey, what should we eat tonight? Should we have Italian? All right, let's go to Amphora or whatever it is, right? We want people to think of us and think of the unique experience of going to this restaurant. So it's a nonsensical name in the sense that it doesn't have any sort of restaurant connotation with it.
It sounds to
That's
me like an old
very,
record
yeah.
store, but I'm very
Yeah.
literal. It's
Well,
like
what it is
vinyl.
yeah, the address that we're on is the site of a record studio that was here earlier. It was called
Okay.
Legacy Recording Studios, which was the last sort of dying sigh or whatever of the record industry or record studio industry in New York. A lot of great music has been made in the city. Right now, there are very few independent studios left. So
Wow.
it's
So
kind of an
nice.
homage to an industry that went away. Yeah,
So is it a wine bar or restaurant or both or?
it is a restaurant
Mhm.
that also has a separate cocktail bar,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's kind of a big place. It's a big
Oh, it's
sprawling.
big.
It's not a massive restaurant, but it's a pretty sizable venue. We have, I think, tonight we'll probably feed and pour wine and drinks for 200 people or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So I'll when we're done here, I gotta head down to the restaurant floor and see what's going on.
Wow. Speaking
Yeah.
of that, time's flying. James Norton is asking, what's in your glass, Arvid? What are you drinking?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I should loop back to what we were talking about earlier about finding great wine on the wine list. I have two very concrete tips.
Okay.
One, so the white wine, I have two glasses because I'm
Okay.
greedy. The first wine that I'm drinking is from a domain that I like a lot. It is a white wine called Llum, which I think means light in Catalan. It's from a domain called Roc des Anges from Roussillon in the south of France. An
Okay.
area that is very, very underrated for wine and especially for white wine. And you'd think that this is kind of sun-drenched southern France bordering on Spain, but it's a really mineral, not low alcohol, it's 12.5%, but it's a really fresh, high altitude, really intensely sort of saline and really cool different aromatics wine from a great domain, a lady called Marjorie Gallet that makes this wine. This is my sort of look off the beaten path. Go for
Nice.
things like Roussillon White, Grenache Blanc or Grenache Gris, and Macabeo. That's one
And
tip, very concrete.
12.5% is low these days.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's a delicious bottle of wine. Very great value too. They make great reds too from like 100-year-old Carignan. So very worth looking for. Not expensive. The
Cool.
other great tip is
Hmm.
look for lesser wines from great producers. This is
Okay.
a wine from one of the best producers in Barolo, Bartolo Mascarello, today run by Bartolo's daughter, Maria Teresa. Um, a really iconic traditional Barolo producer whose wines today are highly sought after, very rare, getting up there, expensive, secondary market, auction, etc. But what I'm having here is the Dolcetto that is from this estate. So this is a lesser wine, so to speak, of this domain. It doesn't have the fancy label of Barolo or anything like that. And there are plenty of examples of this. You have producers, especially all over in the old world, who make not just one wine, but they make a whole range of wine. And usually the lower appellation wines in that range are really great value.
Huh.
Whether that's a producer who makes an Hermitage, but also makes a Saint Joseph or a Cote d'Aron, those wines are usually great.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
like
a
Max
very
Mara.
solid tip.
Yeah, like the
Mm.
major designers do, like Max Mara, and then Max Mara
Hmm.
weekend wear. You get real
Yeah,
great deals on those
yeah,
second labels.
I think
Um,
so.
yeah.
And it's usually not that they're more mass production
No.
in this sense. Many of these wines are as limited as the top wines or limited in production. But if it's something that the family's been making for 100 years, they're not going to stop making it just because another wine is the, sort of the the bee's knees at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. We are just flying on time here, but I have to touch on natural wines because you had a blog post that really caused quite a stir, which is interesting. I always love delving into that. So tell us
Yeah,
in a sort of micro bite, what are natural wines? And you sort of
sure.
changed your position on or your view of them from, you tell us kind of what they are
Well,
and
so
how
this
you feel about
this
them.
is a background. I think I wrote this blog post in 2013 or something
Mm-hmm.
like that, and it sort of
Mm-hmm.
haunted me since because I've never been able. I kind of had to retire my blog because I could never top that sort of initial big thing.
It's still out there.
But it was a big it got a lot of attention, and I think I was so just as a background, I was working in Copenhagen at the time, and Copenhagen had a big natural wine scene, sort of after Paris. It was like Paris, Copenhagen, Tokyo had this sort of triangle of. It seemed like every great restaurant that opened had to be fully committed to serving natural wine. It was kind of a self-feeding loop where the weirder, the better. And unfortunately, what I was sort of railing against a little bit of what I saw in that was that when the most sought after restaurants at the time, it was things like Noma and all the sort of offshoot restaurants that came from that. And nothing against them. I think it's the greatest restaurant in the world. I still do. But what happened was that if they were attracting all of the sort of young talent, if you were an 18-year-old or 19, whatever, moving into the restaurant business, your goal, if you had ambition, was to work at Noma, right, or to work
Mm-hmm.
in that circle. You got there and you were part of the sort of the rock star crew, and all you learn about is that all the classics of the wine world are doing it wrong, and instead you should drink unfiltered brown Chenin Blanc from Loire or whatever it is. Like the only thing that's right
Natural.
is yeah. I was hearing a lot of dumb stuff at the moment. I was hearing things like, there's no great wine made with. There's no great wine made in Bordeaux, or there's no good Cabernet, things like that. That just kind of got to me because I really do think that the best that the natural wine world has to offer is really great.
Mm.
And I do think even more important than that is that whole movement has made, and the strength of that movement has made every conventional, for lack of a better word, producer in the world of wine rethink their way of doing viticulture and winemaking and lowering intervention, lowering chemicals in the vineyard, and lowering sulfur levels, etc. Things that are good. They really prompted that sort of movement in the world of wine. So it's great that got the discussion started. I do think that the sort of the fervor has died down since those years, like 2013, or earlier than that. This was probably like the beginning of the 2010s, um, it was such a strong fanatical movement. I feel like now it's become much more sensible, and I see a lot more mixed things on these lists. Even on my list, I mean, a lot of the things that I have on my list are natural wine. I just don't like to put that term out there as such.
Right. Did
Yeah.
did it become a religion? Is it still a religion? And do you think that the term will fade away?
No, I think the term might stay, but I think what we're seeing now is a lot of sort of co-option of the term. We see giant ad campaigns for brands that are definitely not making natural wine, sort of claiming the term because it's not a regulated term.
No.
And as soon as I shouldn't sort of I might get a lawsuit in my hand, but I think it was
Oh,
someone like one of the giants in California recently used the term in their ad campaign. They're making millions of bottles of mostly industrially made wine.
right.
Uh, Once that starts to happen, it really starts to dilute the value of the whole thing.
Like the
Um,
term reserve, it's unregulated
yeah,
in the
yeah,
new
makes no
world.
sense. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm really thankful for what that movement did
Hmm.
in sort of getting the discussion out there and making everyone rethink what they're doing in the world of wine. Um, and I'm really thankful for the best that world has to offer because the best wines are really great wines and they always were great wines even before the term natural. Um, yeah, I guess that's that.
All right. Well, no, it was a well
Yeah,
thought out post. I read through it and like you
yeah.
advice for winemakers, for journalists. And I just thought it was really well thought
Well, I'm
out.
glad it
And
holds up a little bit. I haven't dared look at it. It's also been, like I said, a 5 years period or something, so it's hard to go back and defend something that old. But yeah,
well, it's like
got it.
stirring the lees or
Yeah, yeah,
recirculating
exactly.
the cap. It like will
Yeah,
keep coming back.
yeah.
You know what? I haven't even got to half the questions I wanted to ask you, Arvid. But is there anything we've left out that you'd like to mention now as we wrap up?
I saw one of your questions was your favorite sort of wine gadgets,
Yeah, yeah,
and I
please.
wanted to share a couple of things
Sure.
that I think are both sort of high and low and really fun and really solve some problems in the wine world that are not usually thought of and not usually they're no good solutions. I mean, some of them are fancy wine tools. There are things like the Durand wine key if you're opening
Oh yeah.
old bottles of wine. This is a fancy kind of high-end wine key. It's a combination of sort of an osso and a lever, and it helps to pull out really, really old corks. I like this sometimes. It's kind of a crutch too. You can get good at opening old corks with a regular wine key of some sorts. But I'd like to show three things that I think are really fun, that
Awesome.
are very inexpensive
Yeah.
and are really good, especially if you're opening up a fun old bottle of wine, or especially a big bottle of wine. So
Great.
the first of these is the two of these come from the sort of chemical lab. You can order them off Amazon, and the last of them come from any hardware store. So my two favorite tools that I use on a daily basis in the restaurant is a pipette,
Is
kind of a
that a
bigger.
wine thief?
It is a wine thief. This is kind of there are fancy sort of glass versions that you buy something like this, like you use in like in a lab,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah.
to baste your turkey or whatever it
Yes.
is,
Looks
right?
very technical.
Yeah,
Back to
yeah,
nanotechnology. Yes.
yeah.
Why do you use those? What are you using them for?
So I use these to, let's say I have an old bottle of wine, and I do open up a lot of old fancy wine. So if you open up something that's 20, 30 years old and you're not sure how this wine is doing,
Hmm.
but you don't want to upend the bottle and pour yourself a pour because that means shaking up all the sediment, right? So what you do is you open up your bottle, you take the cork out, and then you can easily steal a little sample out of it
Ah,
without disturbing the wine. And then you can decide, hey, am I decanting this now? Am I decanting it later? Am I decanting it not at all, or just a minute before service? That's a good tool.
that's
Don't
neat.
shake up the sediment in the bottle.
That's
Next
great.
tool is another chem lab thing. I guess you could use a regular Q-tip, but they're a little short. So I buy these sort of lab. You can buy like 100 of these for $10.
Where do you buy those?
Amazon. Just search for
Okay.
swab.
Swab.
They're
Oh,
great.
right.
If you ever have a crumbly old cork, so if you open up a bottle of wine and there are little residues of cork, you can either use this to kind of stick it in the bottle, and it just the action of surface tension will sort of suck a little liquid up into the cotton swab, along with those bits of cork. It's great. It's a
Huh.
very very good tool. Whether you that tool, and this is gonna shock some people, but this is how, if you ever need to, let's say you're hosting a big party and you want to serve that double magnum or that 6 liter bottle that you've been saving for a few years, and that bottle now has to be decanted. But anything above a magnum is really tough to decant properly because the glass is so thick that you can't see through it with a candle. You probably can't hold it. The best tool you can get is a rubber hose. This will cost you a few dollars in any hardware store. Just a rubber, like it shouldn't be thick enough to
Really?
cover the hole inside of the bottle. You stick that into the bottle, and to the level where if you have a bottle standing up, which you should, if you're going to decant it,
I love this.
so that you don't get all the way to the bottom, but sort of
Right.
a safe distance, so you can then decant off the rest normally. And then you either create a pressure.
Yeah.
Just love it. You're a good siphon. If you ever siphon gas or whatever you've done, you know
Yeah,
the
that's
trick.
what I'm going to say is if you're
Siphoning them.
siphoning gas, if you're stealing
Yeah,
gas, yeah, just use the same
exactly.
technique.
Yeah, that's the most gentle way you can decant a bottle of wine. There's no air influence. There's
Huh.
no stirring of any sediment because you're only decanting from sort of up in the bottle. You can lower it slowly down as you see the sediment. You use a
I like that.
flashlight on the other side. So
Yeah.
it's very, very high tech and very low tech at the same time.
I love it.
Don't
Oh my
don't
gosh.
don't fall for all the $100 gadgets. You can get a long way with some really really simple tools.
That is fabulous. Only from you, Arvid, with your
Yeah.
combination background of nanotech, technology, engineering, and wine. So tell us where we can connect with you online. This has been
So
fabulous.
yeah, I'm barely on social media. I used to be good at that. Again,
That's
before
okay.
opening a restaurant and having a baby. I'm on social media, but I'm not that active. I'll get better. At Arvid Rosengren, so just my name spelled out on every platform: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram,
And your restaurant
and
is Legacy
Le-
Records?
Legacy Records. It is
.com?
legacyrecordsnyc.com.
NYC.com.
And I think it's Legacy Records Restaurant on Instagram. That's probably
Okay.
where we're the most active.
People
Yeah,
will look for that.
yeah, do that.
Arvid, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I couldn't have asked for better. Like lots of great advice, tips, and stories. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us tonight.
Well, thank you so much. It's great being here.
Okay. Yeah, thanks,
Bye, guys.
Arvid.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye-bye. Take care. All right, folks, stay tuned because I'm going to announce the winner from last week's contest. We're not done yet, but what a great conversation. And all of you, what great comments. Let's look at what's coming in here. My goodness, the name of his restaurant, Lori, is Legacy Records. It sounds like our old record store. James Norton, we answered your question. Charlotte is having the Sancerre Le Châtelainy, Joseph Milo. By the way, Charlotte, you won a signed copy of my book a couple of episodes ago, so please email me your address so I can send you that book. You can email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. So you're always a loyal listener, Charlotte. Great tips on decanting, says Paul. So great, says Ellen. Great show, Beverly. Great discussion, Lori. How delightful. Excellent episode. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys, for bearing with my tech challenges. There's always tech challenges. So, the winner from last week's, where's my thingamajiggy? Competition or share, whatever. Yes, there it is. At least something works, right? Eric Sykes, I don't think he's online right now with us, but he is a regular listener, and for his share and comments on last week's episode, he's going to be getting Jamie Evans' wine and weed pairing wheel and some charts, some really neat stuff. Eric, I know you're in Chicago. I'm going to connect you and Jamie so that you can get your prize. But folks, take a moment to share this. and tell folks why you think it's worth listening to, because now we're on the replay version, right? Even if you're watching the replay, you can still share and qualify for next week's winner, which I will announce. Of course, next week is Thanksgiving in Canada, so we're taking a little bit of a hiatus. So we won't be online, but we'll be back week after next with an interesting guest, and I'll be posting that in Facebook. As always, thank you so much for spending part of your Sunday evening with me. I love this. I look forward to it. It's not a chore. I love it. I look forward to connecting with you, to being here, to having a live conversation. Really, this is one of the highlights of my week. So I will say goodnight for now. I hope something good is in your glass, and I will see you, I guess, in 2 weeks' time. Take care and enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. Bye-bye for now.